You're here.
Oh, God, stop. You're gonna do that thing where you open up a weird-ass case of torture devices while inexplicably detailing your master plan and how I don't fit into it.
I'm building a better...
Seriously, you don't have to. Really. You're building a criminal empire because Daddy kicked you out of Janus Corp.
And you think this is a big fuck you, but in actuality, it's a very misguided attempt to win back his respect.
I get it.
There's this weird thing that happens to movies sometimes, is sometimes when they hit theaters, they don't do as well as thought. But then through home release or nowadays streaming, we see the movie become more of a, as it's called, cult classic, where more people tune in and watch, and that could lead to more movies in that series down the line, or just more seeing the characters that appear in the movie. Maybe we get spin-offs. It's happened before, and especially with DC. I think the most recent one would have to be The Suicide Squad. Didn't do very well for a box office standard, but the critics liked it, the fans liked it, and once it got on streaming on HBO Max, it was like, boom, like people were just watching it, and it was seen as one of the best DC movies that have been made in pretty much quite a while. Like, it was very, very highly rated. But there was a movie that came out a year before that from DC that I think has garnered more of a cult classic following than The Suicide Squad, because I feel like The Suicide Squad was hurt not only from COVID-19 being in effect and theaters being very limited and some shut down, but after the tanking of the first Suicide Squad movie, even though it did well at the box office, it wasn't, like, very well received positively. I think people were just hesitant to see it and said, I'll wait for it to come on streaming service, or instead of going to the theater, they actually watched it on HBO Max because it was on HBO Max simultaneously as it was in theaters. So that kind of, you know, probably dropped the box office down a little bit. But the one that I think is more of a cult classic is 2020's Birds of Prey and the Fantabulous Emancipation of one Harley Quinn. Now, this movie has a weird history, as basically what this was after the box office success of the original Suicide Squad, it was announced that a Harley Quinn movie was going to be made with Margot Robbie reprising her role as the character, and she would also have some production credits on it. She was going to have some form of control for this movie. Now, from early 2017, early 2019, it was in early development as a Gotham City Sirens movie. They wanted to get Harley Quinn, Poison Ivy, and Catwoman together in the DCEU on the big screen. However, there was many delays due to troubles with the script, and they really couldn't get any actors or actresses to agree to these roles, and I think it was mainly because around this time DC was dealing with a lot of failures. Other than maybe Wonder Woman and Shazam, it was a time where Justice League was coming out, Batman vs. Superman didn't do too well. It was just kind of like, I guess more people were hesitant to do this movie because they were worried about what would happen if it tanked at this point in time. They kind of flipped things around, made a script, and the movie title was announced to be Birds of Prey and the Fantabulous Emancipation of one Harley Quinn. So that means the Birds of Prey were to be featured, and it was supposed to have Mary Elizabeth Winstead as Huntress, Rosie Perez as Officer Montoya, Journey Smollett-Bell as Black Canary, with other actresses appearing, Margot Robbie as Harley Quinn, obviously the main. Ewan McGregor of Obi-Wan Kenobi fame was Black Mask, or Roman Sionis as he's mainly called in this movie. Ellie J. Bosco was Cassandra Cain, a young Cassandra Cain. This wasn't like second Batgirl Cassandra Cain, this was like 14-year-old pickpocket Cassandra Cain. And Chris Messina was supposed to play Victor Zsasz. This was only the second time we were ever seeing Zsasz in any movie adaptation, as he was in Batman Begins as a really minor character, but he was there. Now, after much delays and all this kind of stuff, the movie released on February 7th of 2020, and as we can kind of tell, it was a sequel or even a continuation of 2016 Suicide Squad, as Harley Quinn is telling us the story of how the Joker broke up with her, and now she's on her own, and she's trying to cope with that. But throughout the movie, she tries to find her true self. You know, now that she's away from the Joker, she can be more than just his girlfriend or ex-girlfriend. She can be Harley Quinn, and throughout this time she gets herself stuck in all these shenanigans. She finds herself in the middle of Roman Sionis trying to find Cassandra Cain because she pickpocketed his diamond, and apparently you got Officer Montoya trying to find Harley Quinn for blowing up Ace Chemicals, and Black Canary and Huntress get into this because Black Canary ends up getting a job with Black Mask and all this kind of stuff, and she finds out that, you know, he's not really a great person. And with Mary Elizabeth Winstead, she is the daughter of a rival family of Siotises that ended up getting killed because, well, they wanted power, so the only way they could get power was to kill everybody. However, they didn't realize that they didn't kill Huntress. She went to live with this different adopted family where they trained her in combat, and now she's out for her revenge. And eventually, they all end up meeting up with each other, and they all have realized they have to team up to defeat Roman Siotis. And they also all wanted to kind of protect the kid in some way, even though Harley's job was to get Cassandra to Black Mask. She then starts to realize that this isn't the right thing to do. This is when you start to see that she's like, you know, if it were anybody else, I'd probably let it slide, but this is a kid, and I can't let him kill the kid, you know, all this kind of stuff. And all in all, they go through, they have their big fight with Roman Siotis, which really is unceremoniously ruined by how he dies, which is just Cassandra Cain pulls the pin on a grenade and sticks it in his hand without him knowing, and he just kind of like holds on to it for multiple seconds, jumps into the ocean and blows up when he easily just could have thrown the grenade in the ocean. And then it's like, oh shit, wait, I'm the only one with a gun, so now, you know, I can just shoot these two. Like, I guess it's just, you look at movie logic and real life logic, it doesn't add up, but that's just how it was. I guess Roman Siotis had to die in some way, and it was just kind of like a cheap way to die. But all that got done, they all went their separate ways. The movie was over. Harley was later caught, and that's where we see her in The Suicide Squad.
What are you doing back in prison house?
I got road rage in a bank. Oh, so sorry.
And the other three form the Birds of Prey, leading us to believe that there's some sort of sequel on the way, or at least there was. Now, this movie didn't do all that well at the box office. I mean, it grossed more than its original budget, but it wasn't like a whole lot more. It was definitely just barely over that limit. Now, I don't really think it was fully its fault, though, because you gotta look at the release date for this movie, February 7th of 2020. About a month later, COVID-19 would hit the world.
You need to shut the fuck up!
And theaters everywhere would just shut down. So obviously it was doing very well for what it was doing. If it made over $200 million at the box office in a month, it was definitely on its way up to at least, I'll say, making like $500 million, which would have been a box office success. But COVID said, nah, we're going to shut this down, because it was a highly anticipated movie. People wanted to see this kind of more solo leading Harley Quinn movie, even though she had, you know, other people in it. It was just kind of like, you know, usually when you get a Harley Quinn movie, she's always tagging along with somebody, or when you see her, I should say, she's always tagging along with somebody, getting in her own shenanigans, and eventually meeting up with the others and, you know, fighting alongside them or fighting against them, this, that, and the other. So with theaters being shut down, the movie was exclusively just streamed on HBO Max, so it's not like it was pulled completely. They just said, well, I guess we'll put it on the streaming service now, or I'm not sure if it was on the streaming service simultaneously with the movie. DC used to do that a lot, but now I think they're doing, after a 45-day theater run, they start to put their movies on HBO Max, just because I guess they realize we got to get some box office, and if we put the movie on the streaming service the same time it's in theaters, most people are just going to watch it on the streaming service, so it's just a loss of box office revenue. It was pretty well received for what it was. I mean, the critics gave it a 79% on Rotten Tomatoes, and people were watching this thing on HBO Max. Like, its popularity was definitely there, and that kind of leads me to believe that it was more forced to become a cult classic because of COVID. I feel like it was on its way to being a movie that people would look back and go, oh yeah, this was great. But with it technically being a box office bomb, it's now a cult classic in the fact that it left theaters and its popularity grew even bigger through streaming service and home release. But with the circumstances, you kind of look at it and go, but it wasn't on its way to being a box office failure. It wasn't like the Suicide Squad where, you know, it had a movie out beforehand that kind of, you know, even though it did well at the box office, wasn't well received, so people were hesitant to see it. And theaters were open, so it had more of a shot at beating Birds of Prey at the box office, but it didn't. It didn't even make back its original budget, whereas at least Birds of Prey was able to go over that. But it's one of those movies where it was out of its control, but in the end, we look at it now as that because that's what it is. It's the definition of a cult classic, and it's led to some talks of a sequel. I've heard there is a sequel happening that's going to have, you know, just the Birds of Prey featuring Batgirl, and then I've heard it's not going to happen, but I don't know, maybe we'll see when this Batgirl movie comes out in December if the Birds of Prey sequel will be announced, because Jurnee Smollett-Bell's Black Canary is supposed to make an appearance in the Batgirl movie, so there's still that possibility that this movie does get a sequel, but it won't be Harley Quinn related. It'll be more Birds of Prey related with Batgirl entering the fray, and I think that could be interesting because you're doing something different. You know, you got your Harley Quinn character there. Now that that's done with, let's do something else, continue with the trio of the Birds of Prey and add a new character in there that, you know, we can kind of, you know, develop even more. So it's going to be interesting to see where they take that, but this movie became so popular that DC's like, you know, maybe we should do a sequel to this, see how it goes, just add a different character in there as opposed to Harley Quinn and, you know, kind of work with a different story, more of the hero side of things. Even though I think the Birds of Prey definitely are heroes, they do work more in vigilante type ways, sort of that like a Batman and whatever. The original movie in itself, or as I should say the only movie in itself, goes down in history as an unusual, not even mess. I mean, I guess the production of it at first was a mess, as it was just delay after delay after delay, change after change with the script. And when we eventually got to the final product, I will say this: was it the Harley Quinn movie we were looking for? Probably not. I feel like there was definitely some different things you could have done with Harley Quinn in a solo movie, but I think the fact that it was fun and the people who were in it enjoyed doing it, you could definitely feel that atmosphere. It was just overall a fun atmosphere, and I think that's why people like it so much. I don't think it's that they think it's like the greatest thing ever made, but if you're bored and just want to have a good time, then you can pop in that movie, you can watch it, and throughout its hour, and I think it's like 45 minutes, you're just entertained throughout. It doesn't really lose you, even though at the beginning it can be a little confusing because of Harley's storytelling. That's the whole point. Her storytelling is supposed to be all over the place, but once she catches up with everything, it becomes more easier to follow, and the characters are just likable. Except Roman Sionis, he's a fucking dickhead, but that's just how it's supposed to be. I think it just surprised me that Ewan McGregor played that character, and he played it to perfection, that it actually made me hate Ewan McGregor for a little while, but that's his job. He acts, and if he needs to act like an asshole, then that's just what he has to do. That's my thoughts overall on Birds of Prey and how it really forcefully became a cult classic. You can tell me in the comments below, how do you think this would have done in the theaters if it didn't have to be pulled because of a pandemic like COVID-19? Do you think it actually would have been a box office success, considering in its first week or so it already grossed over the budget of the movie? Or do you think it would have been one of those ones where it would have been okay but still would have became a cult classic after its release? Like, people would have saw it in theaters and would have been like, you know, this is fine, this is good, but as they would go back and watch it on streaming or Blu-ray or something like that, they would realize that, you know, maybe I underestimated this movie a little bit. Maybe it's not as bad as I thought, because it took me a while to see this movie because I was so hesitant. But once I saw it, I was like, yeah, this is something I can watch again. It definitely is. It's not my favorite DC movie, but it's also not the worst thing that I've seen, and it also turned out better than I thought it was going to be. But that's just some movies. I mean, when you have super high expectations for it, only to be let down in the slightest of ways, you know, it's not like you hated it, but you expected more. Or maybe you're just hesitant because you're not sure, and you just kind of like, I'll get to it eventually. That was me. I got to it eventually, and part of me is sad that I didn't get to it sooner. But that's it for me. Stay safe out there, wear your mask, get vaccinated, and until then, I will catch you all Yeah, the next one.
That wasn't me.
But you dared him to do it.
Yeah, but I dare a lot of people to do a lot of things, okay? Come on, I'm not even with him anymore.
I know. That means there's no one here to stop me.
All
You're
right.
gonna die, Quinn.
Oh, a penny. We're shooting arrows now?